Would you come down, please?
Yes.
You need some more water?
Oh, that's right.
Oh.
Oh, you can come on in.
They thought they were in a different courtroom because they didn't recognize me. All right, good afternoon, everyone. And the answer to your question is yes. And it's a number one buzz is what it's called. But can anybody tell me why they'd call it a partial? Why would they call that a partial? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. McGinnis. We're going to continue where we left off this morning. You were describing the situation where the defendant shot Mr. Rosenbaum. I want to talk about where you were at that location and what was going on through your mind. Earlier, I think you said your eyes were focused on the barrel of the gun. Is that fair to say?
That's, yes.
When you saw what was going on in front of you between Mr. Rittenhouse and Mr. Rosenbaum, what was going through your mind at that moment?
Well, at the point at which Mr. Rittenhouse turned around and Mr. Rosenbaum was continuing to advance, that's when I realized that they were going to, I guess, collide or meet, but it was clear based on the speed with which Mr. Rosenbaum was running and obviously what was shouted beforehand that, they weren't coming together to have a friendly meeting. And given that Mr. Rittenhouse was armed, I became extremely worried because I was behind Rosenbaum that I was going to be caught in whatever was about to happen.
Did you feel like you were positioned in the line of fire?
I did, and that's why I altered my trajectory slightly as the shots were being fired.
When those shots were being fired, did anything happen to you?
What exactly do you mean by that?
Did you get hit?
Nope.
Did you feel at that moment like you had gotten hit?
Well, I told the police the night of because they were asking me, where my eyes were. So as as Rosenbaum was lunging forward, my eyes were on the gun. But as the shots, when the shots were fired, I did actually change my. I looked down at my legs because it's difficult for me to say whether it was a sound or a sensation, but there was feeling sound that something went past my legs, and I looked down, and then I looked back up, and I actually stepped my feet to make sure that I was fine.
You told the detective that you felt something on your leg, and your first thought was that you had been shot, correct?
I was worried of that, absolutely. Again, I'm not sure whether it was something that actually you know, actually contacted my pants, or whether it was just the, you know, sensation sound, but it caused me to look down, and I did, you know, stamp my legs to make sure that they felt okay.
Did you feel that the defendant's actions of turning around and pointing the gun and discharging those rounds put you in danger?
I would say that, given where I was, certainly I was in danger. Yes.
After the, let me back up 1 second. We've talked a lot about Mr. Rosenbaum's actions towards Mr. Rittenhouse, and I just want to clarify one part of that. At any point, did you see Mr. Rosenbaum touch the defendant's gun?
It's hard for me to say whether he actually made contact with the gun, but what I can say is that they were extremely close, and that if he did, then it didn't alter the trajectory of the weapon. So if he did, it wasn't like, you know, he got a hand on it. It would maybe barely grazed it, but they were very close, and it was actually since I was behind him, it, you know, his body was partially obstructing the barrel of the gun at that time. So it's hard for me to say definitively whether or not he actually made contact, but not that I saw. I couldn't say definitively.
I couldn't hear the last.
Oh, which part?
Last sentence. Something.
I couldn't say definitively whether or not there was contact made.
We know from all the videos, from all the evidence, Mr. Rittenhouse fires 4 rounds. You testified earlier, Mr. Rosenbaum winds up face down on the ground, correct?
Correct.
What did you do then?
Well, after the shots were fired, there were other shots that were going off, and at this point, I'm aware of the fact that, you know, that's probably gunfire. Mr. Rittenhouse, from my perspective, had run away, and Mr. Rosenbaum was lying behind a car, and so I knew that he was, given the shots were fired at such close range, that he had to have been hit, and he was lying lifeless on the ground, and so I saw him behind the car, and I saw it as both a place that I could get safety, but also help him, and so I ran over. I said something along the lines of, "Are you okay? I'm going to flip you over slowly," and then I flipped him over, and at that point, other people were arriving, and that's, you know, basically all the rest is on video. But we were trying to. I presume that there were, you know, given the weapon that he was using, that there had to be big wounds, and as people arrived, we were looking for those, and then somebody shouted that there was a hospital across the street, at which point I told one individual to grab his other arm, and we carried him across the street. Should I just continue with?
Let me stop
Okay.
you there for a second. Can we please play Exhibit 19? 19? Oh, I gotta turn this. Is it hard for you to see that?
I certainly don't like to watch it.
I understand. I wanted to show that to you because there's a moment after the shooting where you are taking your shirt off. Why did you do that?
Because I presume that, given how close they were, that he had been hit, and that my dad was an ER doctor, and you know, if something's bleeding, you apply pressure. So that was the goal with doing that.
We see in the video that the defendant runs around the cars and comes close to you. And again, like I said earlier, we're going to try and go back to that moment in time. I
Yes.
know, benefit of hindsight, but at that particular moment as you're standing there next to Mr. Rosenbaum's body, did you know that was the defendant?
I did not.
What did you think was going on with that figure next to you?
Well, the way that I saw it from, like, it was kind of a tunnel vision situation. So I was looking at Mr. Rosenbaum on the ground and attempting to find where the wounds were, and it was like a pair of legs arrived next to me from my peripheral vision, and I just screamed, "Call 911." And then I saw a hand reach into the pocket, and I assumed that that was what was happening. And actually, when I got up, I did, watching the video after the fact, I was facing Mr. Rittenhouse, but given that I was in the process of removing my shirt, I was actually looking at the ground, and I told the police, and I actually remember the moment the next morning that I realized that that was Mr. Rittenhouse when I saw the video.
If you had known in that moment that that was Mr. Rittenhouse, would you have felt in danger?
I think I felt in danger anyways, but I certainly, I think, would have maybe changed my tone of voice. I can't really imagine what I would have done, but I mean, I was afraid in that moment anyways, so it's hard for me to say.
The individual who you sensed next to you, we now know the defendant, you said he pulled out his phone.
I just saw his hand go into his pocket, and that, like, from my perspective, that's all that I saw. And I assumed that, you know, that was, you know, I had said call 911, hand went into the pocket. I assumed that that was what was happening.
Did you hear the defendant say anything at any point after he shot Mr. Rosenbaum?
I did not, no.
Can we please play Exhibit 15? And just so you know what to expect, sir, this is going to be the video you took of Mr. Rosenbaum's body. I apologize, but I need to show it. I'm sorry.
You okay? Just don't move, man. Don't move. All right, can I flip you over real quick? Fuck. I'm gonna flip you over real quick, bro. Here, flip over real quick. Just gotta get pressure on this, dude. Where's it at?
Where is it? On it. Turn around.
Where's it at, dude? Get a light on it. Get a light. Give me a fucking light.
Put pressure on it. Put fucking
Where?
pressure on it.
Where, dude? Where? Where's the hole?
Where you at?
Get the
It's
fucking
right
mask
here
up.
in his head. Come on. Put pressure. Put pressure. Put pressure.
Call the police. Call the
Put a
police.
lot of pressure. Hey, keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open. You shot him.
I didn't. I don't know.
Hey, you're okay.
Just get pressure on this shit.
But you gotta keep him alive.
Hey,
I got
bro,
him, brother. I got
just
him.
talk to me, bro. What's your name, bro?
Stay with me.
Hey, what's your name, bro? What's your name, bro?
Is y'all thinking the hospital right here?
Yeah, get him up. We got a car. We got a car. Yo, keep pressure on it.
I got him. Get him. I got him.
Keep pressure on
I
that.
got him. Get his arms. Put that down.
I got you, dude. I got you.
Please, guys, make sure he has a hold.
Hey, keep his
The video we just watched was one you were recording, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Earlier you described holding your phone up as the chase is going on, and the phone wasn't set to record video. At what point did you realize that and make a switch?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no clue. I don't know how it went from photo to record, and I don't know how it started at that particular moment. I actually, I did call my CEO of my company immediately afterwards from the hospital and told him that I had recorded a homicide. And then I looked at my phone and I realized that it wasn't recording at the time.
I think you testified a little bit ago, and I want to pick up where you left off, that you attempted to treat Mr. Rosenbaum, and then there's a process by which he is carried over to the hospital. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Can you tell us about your involvement in that process?
Well, my hand was on his head and I was under his right shoulder. There was another individual under his left shoulder, and then there were maybe one or two people carrying his legs. And we ran across the street, and there was somebody who told us that he worked at the hospital and that we should put him in the car to get him there quicker, at which point he opened the tailgate. We loaded him into the back of the car, and there were people actually, there's a large crowd around the back of the car, couldn't close the tailgate, and so we just said, forget the tailgate, and we drove down a small ramp, and at that point I was alone in the back with Mr. Rosenbaum, and I was just telling him that we're going to have a beer together afterwards and it was all going to be okay. And once we arrived, a gate had to go up, and we went through the gate, and that was like right next to the ER, and I helped some medical personnel came out with a gurney, and then I helped them load him onto the gurney, and then they took him into the hospital.
We've seen the video that you recorded at Mr. Rosenbaum's body. There's another video that we were watching before that of someone else approaching the scene. It appears to me in the videos that, at least at the beginning, Mr. Rosenbaum has his eyes open. Was he ever responsive to you?
I believe that when I was talking to him in the vehicle, I like to think that he could hear me. It seemed that his eye was looking at me, but it was kind of rolling back, and then when I started talking, it rolled back kind of towards me, and I was looking at him. So I'm not sure if he heard me, but I think perhaps he did.
Did he say anything?
No. He was having difficulty even breathing.
And just so we're clear, from the moment you came upon his body after the shooting until the end, did you ever hear Mr. Rosenbaum say anything at all?
No.
After you helped the hospital personnel get him on a gurney, did you stay at the hospital for a while after that?
Yes. I was, number one, covered in blood, and number two, I didn't have a shirt, and the police actually locked down the hospital. My coworkers, Shelby and Jorge, came to the hospital, and actually Shelby literally offered me the shirt off her back so that I could, not be conspicuous if I tried to leave. But then the police said, you're going to, can you come to the station? I mean, it wasn't really an ask. It was more of a, you're coming to the station. But, I had already talked with my mom and my CEO, and I was resolute in cooperating fully with the police. So I said, whatever you guys need me to do. And I stayed at the hospital for maybe an hour or 40 minutes before a squad car came and got me. And there was actually a detective or a uniformed police officer who asked me some questions while I was at the hospital. And I gave him my phone.
While you were at the hospital, did you see any other folks that had been shot or injured that night?
I did. I saw Mr. Grosskreutz.
Grosskreutz?
Grosskreutz.
Where did you see him at?
So right after I loaded Mr. Rosenbaum onto the gurney, before I could even grasp what was happening, he came in to there were like, the doors that we came in were on one side of the hospital, but then there were like the emergency room sliding doors, like the public access, and he came in through there with an officer, and he was holding his arm, and I saw his arm.
Can you describe what you saw?
It was, his bicep was effectively gone, and there was just a lot of blood.
Can you tell us in your own words how you were feeling at that moment?
It was just surreal. It was, I felt scared about what was going to happen, what I would have to do after that, because I knew, that what I had seen. I became more worried once I realized that my phone wasn't recording.
Why do you say that?
Because that made me realize that it was my eyes that saw it, and that rather than just being able to show, I'd have to tell.
Like you're doing today?
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Mr. Richard?
Yes, Your Honor. After you left the hospital, you went to the Kenosha Police Department, correct?
Yes.
And you were interviewed shortly after this happened by a detective, Separus.
Yes.
And that's not either of these two individuals here, correct?
No.
And you gave them a video, taped, and sound recorded statement, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And that was in a room with a small table and carpeted walls.
Yes.
And you stated to Detective Separus, and I'm quoting from your interview, the guy who I interviewed was trying to evade him. When you're using the term guy who you interviewed, who are you referring to?
Mr. Rittenhouse.
Okay, and he was trying to evade whom?
Mr. It depends on what instance you're talking about, but initially it was very difficult for me to tell who he was evading because the street was dark and I was a ways back. There were a number of individuals kind of moving in his direction, and there was a lot of noise, so it wasn't clear to me who he was evading initially when he started to run.
Okay, but you used the word him, which should be singular. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. I believe that in that same statement, though, I said that there were a couple of individuals, including the man who was shot.
Okay. I'll read from your statement at page 20. And there were other people who were moving very quickly, and I noticed two guys who were moving quickly. One of the ones was the guy who ended up, I guess, getting shot and dying, and they were moving towards him. So he was, according to what I saw, trying to evade these individuals.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the individuals is the guy who gets shot, Mr. Rosenbaum.
Correct.
And the other one is somebody who, to this day, you would not know who it is.
No, yeah, it was dark and it was very difficult to identify. I don't think I could, no.
And you had interviewed Kyle before this shooting, maybe 15 minutes?
It was like 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm off of
I
sorry.
have the metadata
Okay.
in my phone, so
Okay.
according to the metadata on the phone, it was about 14 minutes.
Okay. And when you met Kyle and you interviewed him, he was not menacing to you, was he?
Beyond that he had a weapon, no.
Okay. So what was menacing was the weapon.
When I said menacing in that context, it was the situation that was menacing, which is a number of armed individuals. And specifically in that instance, I was most nervous about the individuals on the roof because I couldn't see them. So it was just more concerning to me because at least, the folks on the ground, I could see them.
Okay. And Kyle was one of the ones on the ground.
Yes.
And the interview, which Mr. Binger took from and referred to the menacing word, was you being interviewed by a Kyle Horton, and that interview was 26 minutes long, correct? Mm-hmm. And you used the word menacing once.
I guess so. You went through it. So I'll take your word for it, but I don't recall saying it another time.
Okay. And this is your word to Detective Separus. No, it's cool, but he did. I mean, the interview, he was very cordial. Detective, yeah, you, very nice and almost seemed like innocent. Almost seemed like too much for his own good. Do you remember that statement?
Yes, I do.
And you're referring to him being too innocent for his own good, correct?
I was alluding to the fact that it seemed to me that a lot of the people, protesters, rioters, whatever you want to call them, were casting negative looks in his direction, and he wasn't. He didn't seem to be aware of that.
Meaning Kyle wasn't aware of how the people
How pissed off the people were. Not in his group, just the group. Generally speaking, the people who were on the ground who had just been, basically volleyed back by the law enforcement. Those people, not the other armed individuals.
The rioters didn't like the people with long weapons. Is that a fair statement? The way you perceive it.
That's a fair statement in my perception. Yes. I think it was also additionally that I was referring to the fact that he was shouting medical, and that people were looking at him negatively, kind of like angry when they heard, him, and then saw presume his weapon or whatever it was that made them mad.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize. That's where you talked about the duality, a medic having a gun, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And he might not have perceived the problem with that dual role based upon your conversations with him.
Yeah, he might not have perceived how other people perceived him in that situation.
Okay. Reading from a statement from you. I don't know if it was the fire extinguisher or if it was a piece of metal or something, kick something. I have no idea. But when I turned back, the fire extinguisher is gone, and he had the AR-15 kind of like aiming downwards. And at that point, they were heading into the parking lot. And he was kind of facing backwards, and the individual who got shot was advancing towards him, and he actually dodged. He dodged around, and then he ran backwards, so he almost like he turned his back a little bit. You're describing him running away from Mr. Rosenbaum there, correct?
Correct.
And as Mr. Rittenhouse is running away from him, Mr. Rosenbaum is in pursuit, correct?
Correct.
And at one point, Kyle turns around with the weapon, and you're talking about it being in a downward position, but towards Mr. Rosenbaum.
Yes. Are you talking about the final instance where he turned around?
About the first instance.
Yes.
Okay. And this isn't where Mr. Rosenbaum gets shot, correct?
Correct. That was he was kind of up on the curb, and he kind of headed in the direction towards the car lot, and then he stopped and turned.
And then he continues running, and Mr. Rosenbaum continues to chase Mr. Rittenhouse.
Correct.
Didn't he see? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. The instance where I described that there were two individuals, that was kind of at that point in time. So I didn't zero in on Mr. Rosenbaum being kind of the one person pursuing him until after that first kind of juke and run.
Okay. And do you remember Mr. Rittenhouse turning around in the parking lot when Mr. Rosenbaum is chasing him, just Mr. Rosenbaum chasing him?
Yes.
Okay. And this is before the final confrontation.
When he turned around initially, he was kind of on the sidewalk before they got into the lot. And that was when it wasn't clear that Mr. Rosenbaum was the sole, because it was very dark. So perhaps, I'm assuming that was him, but also like I was fumbling with my phone at that juncture and I was hanging up with Shelby. That was kind of all happening in that simultaneous moment. So it's hard, I didn't identify Mr. Rosenbaum until we kind of entered the lot where it was very light.
Okay.
Well lit.
And when he enters the lot, Mr. Rosenbaum, it's Kyle and Mr. Rosenbaum really in that area where the shooting occurred. There's nobody else.
Yes, correct.
And he runs, according to your vantage point, basically as far as he can.
Yeah, I did state to the police the night of that it appeared that when he stopped, he entered an area where there was like a car parked and a wall. I mean, it would have been conceivable that, you know, you could have, the car was like not, it wasn't up against the wall, like you could conceivably have continued, but it seemed to me, my perception that night that he, you know, had entered a bit of a dead end, or at least felt that way.
And he turned and looks at Mr. Rosenbaum.
Correct.
And Mr. Rosenbaum knows that he's chasing an armed individual, correct?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, it's speculation.
He's seen the gun.
You know, it is, you don't, you don't know what he
Okay,
saw.
I'll ask it this way.
Okay.
Mr. Rittenhouse turns around, has a firearm in his arms, hands, correct?
Correct.
The AR, as we refer to
Correct.
it.
Yes.
Mr. Rosenbaum is running towards Kyle Rittenhouse, correct?
Correct.
And there's nothing between those two individuals to block Mr. Rosenbaum's view, correct?
Correct.
Could have stopped at any time once he sees an armed individual, correct?
I assume he could have, yes.
He kept advancing.
Correct.
And he continues to advance until he makes a lunge for the weapon, correct?
Yes. It appeared that he was lunging for the front portion of the weapon.
Okay, which would be the business end of an AR-15.
Yes.
And you know, as you sit here today, that he yelled the words F you, but the whole words, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What was the tone of his voice as he yelled that?
Very angry.
As he goes at Kyle Rittenhouse, correct?
Correct.
And there's been some statements about him shot in the back. Don't dispute it. If you're Mr. Rittenhouse and I'm Mr. Rosenbaum, did you ever see him turn away from you back to Mr. Rittenhouse?
No.
Okay? And your vantage point would allow you to see if in fact this is the proverbial shooting an innocent person in the back, correct?
You mean, was I close enough?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, and as he shot, you never saw him turn around, look at you directly, and begin running away for the back shot, correct?
Correct.
You to the detective that evening describing the confrontation between Rosenbaum and Kyle Rittenhouse. In my best estimation, I think this individual and possibly other individuals decided they were going to get his gun from him, correct?
I'm going to object to that. It calls for speculation.
It's his belief.
But, You can explore what appeared to him to have happened, but when you say belief, people don't talk the way lawyers want them to. Lawyers want very strict adherence to just perception by the senses. In ordinary discourse, people don't talk that way. They combine a whole array of things that they see and perceive with all of their senses and their experience in life, and then they put that into the form of an impression. And now the lawyers, and I'm not singling out one lawyer or another, lawyers typically, they want, well, just the, as was referred to earlier, just the facts. I'm going to let the witness testify as one would ordinarily discourse with others, but keep in mind there's a huge component of things other than what he perceived with his senses, and then I'll let the state redirect on those issues, but he can answer the question.
I'll read the statement to you, then I'll ask you why you believed it or why you thought that, okay?
Yep.
But in my best estimation, I think that the individual and possibly other individuals decided that they were going to get his gun from him. Do you remember telling Detective Sepperson?
I do, yes.
What was that statement based upon?
It was based upon the way that they were advancing towards him. It seemed that they were trying to move quickly, such that they could catch him.
Okay. And from your vantage point, remembering back to that evening, did you see that Kyle Rittenhouse was with anyone that was friendly to him that night?
That night?
At that time?
At that moment, no. Mr. Balch was with him when I was walking behind them, and then after I saw Yellow Pants guy, that was the last I saw Mr. Balch. So he was alone
Okay.
after that.
Statement from you to the detective. And it is very clear from the moment I focused on that situation between those two that the unarmed guy got shot, was trying to get his gun. And you remember making that statement?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And what is that statement based on?
That was the motion of him running and reaching for the front portion of the rifle.
Okay. And that evening, you told the detective he paused, so it looked like he was very close. You used the word very close. What does that mean to you?
Well, I was behind Mr. Rosenbaum, and Mr. Rittenhouse was on the other side of me and Rosenbaum, and so it was clear that as he lunged forward, they almost made contact. It wasn't clear if they did or not, but very close, just meaning like close enough to just reach out and
Okay.
touch someone.
And your perception was that evening, as you watched it, he was going for the barrel of the gun.
Correct.
And the detective followed up on that to pin that down, and you stated, but he was certainly trying to grab the barrel of the gun. You were certain of that night.
Your Honor, I'm going to raise my objection again. This is speculation.
And I'll there certainly is an element of conclusion in the witness's answer, but that's the way people talk in ordinary discourse and convey information one to another. So they have to weigh it in terms of its reliability, knowing that it's not like a series of photographic images. So overruled.
I think it was very clear to me that he was reaching specifically for the weapon, and because that's where his hands went.
Okay. And your statement to the detective Yeah, so it was like the guy he shot was like this. And then he was probably, and he leaned in, so he was like this. And so at that time he was shot, he was kind of leaning forward. You were describing to the detective what you observed Mr. Rosenbaum doing, correct?
Correct.
Could you describe that or show us?
I mean, it's probably easier to show, to be
Please.
honest. It's just like, he was in a low position. He's in a low position running, and then when he went for the front portion of the rifle, he lunged forward like that.
Okay, so you've shown somebody in the tack position, you lunge forward and putting both of your arms out, and you're saying going for the barrel.
I would say he was more like kind of in an athletic position, like you would if you were, like running as fast as you could. And then, I'm sorry, could you repeat the second part?
So he's running as fast as he could, and then you showed both of your arms going out almost like a Superman?
It was like a little bit, I mean, I think Superman would be kind of, straight out. It was more like out and down because the rifle was aimed, like, it was lower than where his hands were, so his hands were actually going kind of downward as well,
And
towards the barrel.
When he goes for the barrel, what does Kyle do with the gun?
He dodged around it
And then does what?
and then leveled the weapon and fired. And it wasn't necessarily leveled because Mr. Rosenbaum was in a lower position, so it was still somewhat angled towards the ground, but it was leveled at his body.
This exchange, ask you if you remember it. That's the only reason why I say that there were more people involved. Detective, okay? In trying to corner this guy or whatever. Detective, because I just heard a lot of yelling and a lot of really fast movement. That's more talking about what you observed at the beginning, correct?
Correct, yes.
But you thought this was a group of people, at least two, trying to get Kyle's gun from him when he's alone.
If I were to, I believe that I was speculating that that's what they were trying to do based on what I saw.
Okay. And the shots that you heard, there's a shot, and then there's Kyle's shots, correct?
Correct.
The shot that you hear first, can you say whether it's in front of you, behind you, to the side of you?
So, like, there's like the building, that's the actual building in that lot. That's to my right as I'm running. And Mr. Rosenbaum and Mr. Rittenhouse are in front of me. And it was like to my left.
Okay. So as you're advancing, it would be from the area of the sidewalk.
Correct.
And you've looked at numerous videos now, not that day, but since, and you actually see the flash of gunfire.
Correct.
Your statement, getting towards the end, and it was pretty clear to me that the guy with the gun was trying to evade the other guy, and that's throughout this event until he stops.
Yes, that's an accurate statement.
He did not want to be caught by Mr. Rosenbaum.
That is correct.
And when he finally did turn and point the gun, Rosenbaum kept advancing.
Correct.
And Kyle Rittenhouse had no way of knowing that this was a three-person grouping. In other words, him, Rosenbaum, you. Is that a fair statement?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. I don't know how this witness could testify as to what Kyle Rittenhouse knew or did not know.
Well, his actual question was not what he knew, but rather whether he asked whether, or he said he had no way of knowing. I think I'd be more comfortable if you rephrased your question.
To your knowledge, did Kyle Rittenhouse know that you were behind Mr. Rosenbaum?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. I don't know how this witness would know what Kyle Rittenhouse knew. It's a complete speculation as to the defendant's state of mind.
Overruled. Well, I think it would need to be phrased in terms of, did the physical circumstances suggest that Mr. Rittenhouse would have been in a position to know?
Sir, would Mr. Kyle Rittenhouse been in a position to know that you were behind Mr. Rosenbaum?
He was certainly close enough, but I wasn't looking at where he was looking. I was looking, like I said, at that point at the front portion of the weapon. It was quite light in that area, so it's very possible that if he had have been looking in my direction, he certainly would have seen me.
But he's running away from where you are until he turns, and he has this guy coming at him, correct?
Correct.
And if Mr. Rosenbaum had stopped 5 or 7 feet away from him, would he have been shot?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
Now, earlier there was, well, I'll go a little bit further. You get your giving aid to Mr. Rosenbaum after he's been shot 4 times. Were those shots slow, bang, 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 or were they in quick succession?
It was extremely quick. The night of, I said it was 3 or 4 because it was so quick that it was hard for me to count.
And now everyone agrees it's 4, and you do too?
Yes.
Okay. And after he's shot, you pick him up and you try to carry him to the hospital, but you stop at a vehicle, correct?
Correct.
What's happening to you as you're stopping or trying to get him to this vehicle? What's happening to you?
Well, there was a very large crowd around us. Everyone was yelling. I was getting bumped, and I thought that I was just being bumped by the crowd, but then, I got bumped a little bit harder, and then I felt a fist hit my face as I was loading him into the back of the vehicle.
And you, sir, I felt what in my face?
A fist.
So there's a large group of people surrounding you and the other individual carrying Mr. Rosenbaum to the car.
Yes.
And people in that crowd were striking at you.
I can only identify the one person because, again, I thought I had a lot of adrenaline, and I didn't think it was anything beyond getting, being in a mob, a crowd of people who were all, I guess very animated. A lot of people were yelling, and I didn't really feel it until it was like a hard punch to the side of my face, and I turned around and saw the individual, and he was pointing at me, like he was mad at me.
Like he wanted more punches at you. Is that it?
Yeah, I at that point I was actually just entering the rear of the vehicle, and so he hit me, and I looked back, and I actually kicked my legs towards where he was at the tailgate to get him away from me.
Thank you. And you go to that interview, and they're very interested in your phone, correct?
Correct.
You are told that they're either going to take your phone and get a search warrant, or you'll give consent, correct?
Correct.
And you don't want to give up everything in your phone because it's your job and your livelihood. Is that a fair statement?
I didn't want to lose possession of my phone because it is my livelihood, yes.
Okay. Did they tell you they weren't going to go into your phone because of Marsy's Law?
I don't recall that.
If somebody said that, you'd remember that, correct?
Yeah, what they said was, can we take your phone to download the videos? And I gave it to him. I don't, recall anything about Marcy's Law.
They told you if you didn't give them consent, they were going to get a search warrant, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And you were not written a curfew ticket, correct?
That's correct. I was not written one.
Now, you also testified about how at this riot, demonstration, whatever you want to call it, there were more firearms than you had seen at other places, correct?
Yes, well, I would say the most firearms was probably Seattle, but yes,
Okay. Portland, you can't open carry or you'll be arrested, correct?
I believe so.
New York, you can't open carry or you'll be arrested,
That's for sure.
for sure. Washington DC, can't open carry or you'll be arrested.
Correct.
Wisconsin, you can open carry.
Correct. You know
So
better
that
than
makes,
I do.
yeah,
Yes.
that makes for a prevalence of guns.
Yes. And I believe the same in Seattle as well.
And the second night of the riots, you came to Kenosha and you saw the car source lot with all the cars, not the one where the shooting happened, but the one right below your hotel burned,
Yeah, it was burning every night.
okay? But that was the night where most all of the cars went out.
Are you referring to Monday night?
Yes.
Yes. The
Okay.
night before the shooting, you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't make myself clear. Monday night, the first car source lot with maybe 30, 40 cars goes up,
Yes.
okay? And the fire department didn't come.
That was when we interviewed the individuals with the power washer and the buckets of water. I saw the fire department responding to a different fire at a furniture store, but not in front of that lot.
Okay, and that's the night where some cars got put on fire at Car Source 2, and they were trying to put it out with a power washer and I think buckets.
Like literally buckets and trash cans of
Okay,
water.
and that was citizens, not the fire department.
That's correct.
And and then I'll end. You had no fear or problem from Kyle or Mr. Balch when you went out on that patrol with them.
I would say that I was certainly fearful just in a general sense, given that there were weapons and that it was a chaotic environment.
Were you fearful of Mr. Balch and Mr. Rittenhouse?
At the time that I was walking with them?
Yes.
I was fearful of the potentiality that, those weapons would be used. So I would say like I was elevated in terms of my assessment of the risk involved in the situation. But I wouldn't say that I was specifically fearful of them individually. I was
Okay.
fearful of what might happen.
You're fearful of the situation in Kenosha on August 25th of 2020, all the armed people, the rioting, the chaos, and the social unrest,
And the guns, yeah.
and the guns.
Yeah.
And both sides had guns.
I actually didn't see, I know after seeing video, I do see that now, but the only armed individuals that I saw that night were in front of the business.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Can we have Exhibit 25 ready, please? Mr. McGinnis, I have an exhibit up on the screen, which is the Exhibit 25. We've shown this to you before. I've heard you testify that you were, well, let me ask you this. Is it fair to say that at the moment this video is paused at, as we see on that screen, you are not yet on the screen? Is that fair to say?
I think that sounds right. I think I was just off the screen to the right, up the street.
And you've talked about your perception of person of interest number 2, which is the one with the square around them, that is the defendant, and what you believe was going on when he arrived at the car source lot. And you've talked about one or more individuals that are after him, he's having to evade them, things like that. There's been some testimony about that, correct?
Correct?
You've already acknowledged that you were further back, it was dark, it was hard for you to see exactly. Is that fair to say?
It's fair, yes.
Okay. What I'd like to do now, Mr. McGinnis, is I'm going to have this video played, and I would like you to pay attention to that area. And we have person of interest number 1 identified, that is Joseph Rosenbaum. Other than him, I would like it if you would point out for us the other individual or individuals that you saw chasing the defendant or trying to corner him or somehow running after him or however you want to describe it. The other individuals that were involved that you believe you saw. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I would say, I wouldn't say chasing, I would say it was like they were directing their attention in his direction and moving towards him.
Okay.
But it wasn't, it wasn't like a dead sprint chase or anything like that.
However you want to put it, I'm not quibbling, but whatever those people are, if you could please, that little wooden pointer in
Yep.
front of you, let us know when you see them. We'll pause, and then you can point them out for us. Does that sound okay?
Okay.
Okay, let's go forward. Thanks.
It was, so basically it's the individuals like in the middle of the street.
Okay, can we pause? Okay, do you want us to go back a little bit?
Sure.
Let's go back 10 seconds.
Because there was a crowd in the middle of the street, but they're basically on the side of the sidewalk.
Why don't you, yeah, please point at it for us. Okay, so you're circling a group of people that are near the sidewalk in front of Car Source. Are you able to count how many people there are there?
It's hard to say. 8, 10.
And do you want us to go back any further, or is this far enough for you to show us what you're referring to?
It was just this group right here.
Okay.
And there was also, it's hard to tell here, but like there was just a group here in the street, and then I believe it, like I said, it was dark. It was hard to say. There was shouting coming from this direction as well.
Can we please play the video forward a little bit? Now, pause, please. Okay, I will, yeah. Madam Court Reporter has asked if we can make sure that you have the microphone
Oh,
close.
yes.
I know I asked you to go up there, so that's
Yep.
my fault. What I'd like to do, if we could, is rewind 20 seconds, please. Okay. And I don't know if I can phrase this easily, Mr. McGinnis. I don't know how to put it. Do you feel like you would be able to point out any folks other than Mr. Rosenbaum that are moving towards the defendant or running after him or in it? I know you said their attention, and that can mean many things. So I guess I'm interested in physical movements. Are you able to point out any individuals that moved physically towards the defendant other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
Do you want to play it again?
Yeah, let's play it again, and I'd like you to keep an eye, well, before we start playing, I'm going to ask you, Mr. McGinnis, if you could please try and keep an eye on that for us, and let us know if you see any of those folks, maybe you can point them out for us. I'm interested in physical movements towards the defendant. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and play it.
Can you go back one more time?
Yeah, sure. Let's go back 10 seconds. Is that far enough?
I just won, I guess, 10 more.
Sure, let's do 10 more. Can we go back 10 more seconds? All right, let's, was that 10 seconds? Okay, this is the beginning. Why don't can we go all the way back to the beginning of the video? All right, we'll start it from there.
I think that so when I told that to police, it was basically you can see me running up. There, just to my left, in the center of the street, there are some individuals who were yelling, and I guess it's not clear to me, whether they were just advancing in that direction and yelling, or advancing specifically towards Mr. Rittenhouse. But the individuals that I was referring to when I said that were in the bottom right portion of the screen. As I was running up, I basically ran past them.
It's clear from the video that Mr. Rosenbaum is specifically coming after Mr. Rittenhouse, chasing after him. The impression, maybe I misunderstood, it seemed to be that you were indicating you saw other people that were directly going after the defendant. Did you see anything like that? Other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
It seemed to me that they were turning their attention towards him, and that they were shouting at him. I wouldn't say that they were like I said, it wasn't like a chase. It was like a turning and kind of directing their attention, and it wasn't, a running at him, more of like turning their bodies towards him, and like those individuals in the bottom right of the screen seemed to be gravitating towards where he was.
But they were already headed in that direction anyway.
Yeah, that's unclear to me where they were. Like I said, I ran up and it was dark, so and I was on the phone, so I just heard the yelling and I saw attention. My eyes went to Mr. Rittenhouse because of where other people were looking.
Would you agree with me that in the video we're watching, this infrared video, this aerial footage, there aren't any other figures that are moving towards the defendant at any point other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
If you rewind, I believe that it's possible that they're just walking in that direction, so it's not.
Let's go back to the beginning of the video, and again, if you can use Sister Marciana's pointer and point out anyone that you believe is moving towards the defendant other than Mr. Rosenbaum. Okay, let's can you come back to the microphone, please? Yeah, where the one we use for the jurors? Oh.
Handheld?
Yeah, that might help. Why don't you bring that along with you when you go to the screen? And let's back up the video to the beginning again. And then you can feel free to speak into that microphone and tell us what you're seeing.
Hello? Yeah. So when I said that, I was referring to this group right here in the street, and they were shouting.
Okay. And my last question to you, Mr. McGinnis, was, would you agree with me that on this video, none of those figures actually physically move towards the defendant? Would you agree with me on that?
They're moving in the direction of the defendant, but like I said, it's not clear whether they were already moving in that direction prior to my arrival. And like I said, that it was their attention and their screaming was directed in his direction, so that's where my eyes went.
The defendant actually, and you both run up behind these people. You approach them from behind as they're walking forward.
Correct.
To your knowledge, did any of those folks look back at you as you were approaching from behind?
To me specifically?
Yeah.
Not that I can recall, no.
And in that lot, that car source lot, at this particular moment, there are some folks in the lot, certainly on the far corner of the lot there, where some parked cars are parked on the left side of the building. We all know now, with the benefit of hindsight, there's a large crowd there who are bashing the crap out of those cars, windows, the doors, everything. We know that with hindsight. Let me ask you this. When you were there that night, as this all is unfolding, again, try and put yourself back in that night without the benefit of hindsight, were you aware that there was a group of folks over there that were smashing out car windows or doing anything along those lines?
When I was on the phone with Shelby, she mentioned that something was going on up the street, but she said like she heard, I believe she said something along the lines of like there's like windows are breaking, and I assume that that was probably from the windows, the car windows being smashed. But other than that, no.
All right. You indicated that the defendant, when he was running away from Mr. Rosenbaum, I think the words you used was he entered a bit of a dead end as he was running by those cars and the building. Do you remember saying that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, on the video here, the person of interest number 2 with the square around him is the defendant, and person of interest number 1 with the circle around him is Mr. Rosenbaum. Can we please continue the video forward? Pause it right there, please. Where did our video go? Okay. I just want to be really clear on this, Mr. McGinnis. Other than Mr. Rosenbaum, did you see anyone else chasing the defendant?
The word chase, I wouldn't use that word to describe anybody else's actions.
Did you see anyone pursuing him physically in any way other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
Like I said, it's not clear to me whether those other individuals were, already heading in that direction. As for, once Mr. Rittenhouse started to run, I didn't see anybody else running after him.
So, Mr. Rosenbaum is running after the defendant. Other than that, no one else is coordinating with Mr. Rosenbaum or helping to corral the defendant or, pen him in or anything along those lines that you saw. Would you agree with me on that?
Beyond the screaming and the yelling and, maybe walking in his direction, no.
The video here shows the defendant, person of interest number 2, and he is about to run. Let's continue the video to the end, please. Okay, let's stop for a second. Can we go back about 10 seconds? A little bit more. Keep going back, please. Oh, I'm sorry, that's all the way to the beginning. Let's play it forward. I'll tell you where to pause. Pause. This video indicates the person of interest number 2, the defendant, running. Would you agree with me? He's going to wind up running into the center of those 4 parked cars, 2 towards the top, 2 towards the bottom, and that's where the shooting occurs?
Correct.
Okay. Now, it appears to me on this video that if you run through those, there's a huge amount of open space on the left bottom of that parking lot, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, like I said earlier, that's why I said a bit of a dead end, because if somebody wanted to pass through that area, it wasn't like the cars were snugged up and next to each other and you'd have to jump over them to get out. Like they were, parked closely, but there was enough space to pass through if you wanted to.
Okay. Now, the area where this all occurs, would you agree with me, is a very well-lit area?
Yes. You mean this all, you mean the final chase?
In the parking lot there where the shooting occurs.
Yes.
There are 3 large lights up on top of the Car Source building that are blasting that parking lot with light. Would you agree with me on
It's
that?
certainly a well-lit, yes, it was a lit parking lot. Like I said, the street just off there was very dark, but that area, there were large overhead lights.
You have described your impressions of what Mr. Rosenbaum was meaning to do or intending to do in his final physical acts towards the defendant. Would you agree with me that you've given us your impressions of that?
Yes.
At any point, did you hear Mr. Rosenbaum say anything about the defendant's gun?
I did not know.
He never said, I want your gun, I'm going to take your gun, give me your gun, I'm going to steal your gun, anything along those lines.
I didn't hear anything like that, no.
And you've already established that after the shooting, Mr. Rosenbaum never says a word, correct?
Correct.
You don't know, as you sit here today, what Mr. Rosenbaum was thinking, do you?
You mean at the time of the shooting?
Yes. Or at any point in his life. I mean, you have no idea what Mr. Rosenbaum was ever thinking at any point in his life. You have never been inside his head. You never met him before. You don't know.
I've never exchanged words with him, if that's what your question is.
So your interpretation of what he was trying to do or what he was intending to do or anything along those lines is complete guesswork, isn't it?
Well, he said, fuck you, and then he reached for the weapon.
Okay, let's talk about that. At that very moment, you've testified, the defendant has turned around facing Mr. Rosenbaum, correct?
Correct.
The defendant has the gun in his hand.
Correct.
Mr. Rosenbaum is advancing and is pretty close.
Yes.
Correct? You believe, you've testified, that Mr. Rosenbaum is reaching for the barrel of the defendant's gun. Is that right?
Yes.
There are many possible reasons why an individual in that position would be reaching for a gun that's pointed in their direction. Would you agree with me on that?
Well, to clarify, the weapon was at a 45-degree angle, approximately. I don't know what you're asking. If you're asking if there's a reason why he would grab it.
You've already given us what you think is the reason. I'm suggesting there are other
When did I say that I gave a reason? I just said that what he was trying to do. I didn't give any reason on why he would. I have no clue. I will say that as many times as you want me to, but I have no clue why he was doing what he did. But I saw him go for the front portion of the weapon, and it was clear to me that that's what he was trying to do.
When you say the front portion, you're talking about the end of the barrel where the bullet comes out.
It'd actually be more like the shroud.
So the what?
Well, it wasn't like he was grabbing for the very, very tip of the gun. It was like he was grabbing for the front portion of it. So like his hand, where he missed, was like, I guess 6 inches up the weapon.
Still on the barrel.
Yes. Oh, yeah, sure.
You indicated that that Mr. Rosenbaum, I think you used the terms, he was in a low position running. Do you remember saying something to that effect?
Yes.
You have any idea how tall Mr. Rosenbaum was?
Is not very tall.
Shorter than the defendant.
Correct.
Shorter than you.
Correct.
And you said that when Mr. Rosenbaum was reaching for the defendant's gun, the defendant, you've given us a physical gesture, and if I'm doing it correctly, and again, I'm going to ask you if I'm doing it correctly, it's like he's got the gun in his hands, the barrel is pointed to the defendant's left, he sort of moves it around almost up and over the outstretched hands of Mr. Rosenbaum. Would that be fair to say?
So that
To the defendant's...
The defendant's left?
Yes.
it was aimed at a 45-degree angle towards the ground. I wouldn't say it was aimed to the left, it was aimed kind of, if you were to draw a line, it was aimed towards Mr. Rosenbaum, but at the ground.
Okay?
And then it was when he lunged that the weapon went to his left.
And again, with the pronouns, I just want to clarify, when Mr. Rosenbaum lunged, I'm using
Yes,
the proper
yes.
names, when Mr. Rosenbaum lunged, Mr. Rittenhouse moved the gun.
Moved the gun to Mr. Rittenhouse's left,
Okay.
and to my right.
And by doing so, I know you've testified you're not sure whether or not Mr. Rosenbaum actually touched the gun. Fair enough?
Correct, yes.
But at any rate, by doing so, Mr. Rittenhouse was finally able to get that gun in a position where there wasn't any more risk of Mr. Rosenbaum grabbing it by doing that little maneuver. Correct?
So at the point at which he dodged around, it was like they were extremely close, and so it's not clear to me what would have happened if those shots hadn't have been fired.
Final question. You talked at the end of your testimony about your feelings as you were accompanying the defendant and Ryan Balch. And you talked about still feeling a sense of your safety being in jeopardy. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me your primary concern was the guns. That's what the thing that was making you feel the most unsafe that night, was the presence of these guns. Would that be accurate?
Well, prior in the evening and in the night prior, there were like some people who tried to take my phone from me, and then there were the other individuals with the bricks. So I would say that it's a baseline level of fear associated with all of those things, but the guns, the presence of the weapons certainly elevated my understanding of the risk of the situation.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
Okay, you may step down, sir. Let's take a break, folks, and I'm going to ask that you return at 10 after. Please don't talk about the case during the break. Read, watch, or listen on any count of the trial.